Hey guys, welcome to a new movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about the movie adaptation of the beloved book series that was in the horror genre, that was big for kids. It was darker than Goosebumps, not quite as dark as R-rated horror films, and that's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. After all these years of the books being a success, being passed down from generation to generation, we finally get a film adaptation of the book. I was personally a big fan of the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books. I remember reading them when I was younger. I read all three of those books. I believe there's three. I don't think they ever made a fourth or fifth one. Um, they keep repackaging them over the years. They keep giving them new designs on the covers and things like that. But for the most part, the stories remain intact. They're finally getting a movie, and here I am reviewing it for you today. So, in this film, you guys, a group of teenagers in the late 60s, they find this old book in a abandoned house in the late 1960s during Halloween night, and they notice that there's a lot of blank pages missing from, or not really missing, but there's a lot of blank pages in the book. There's some stories in it. There seems to be a lot of like journal entries and random horror stories and things of that nature. But there's a lot of blank pages too. So one of the teenagers takes this home and starts to realize that these stories are randomly appearing in the book miraculously during the day, just one at a time. And they seem to be written in a red ink of some kind. Obviously, that's revealed later. Not too much of a secret there since it's a horror film of what exactly the red ink is. But these stories keep popping up, and the names of the teenagers that found this book keep appearing in the stories. And sometimes it could be one of them, sometimes it could be two of them. But these stories keep happening, and they seem to be happening in the real world too as the stories are written. So if there's a big pale lady chasing you in one of these stories, a big pale lady is really chasing you in real life too, while that story is appearing in the book while you're opening it. So throughout the course of this film, these teenagers have to survive these really scary scenarios that keep popping up in this book, and they also have to figure out, how can they get rid of the book. They try burning it, they try throwing it away, they try throwing it in a river and all that stuff, and it still won't work. And the book keeps showing back up and haunting them. So they got to figure out what exactly can they do. What exactly can they do? Do they just have to survive these scenarios and move on with their life? And that's will the book just go away? They have to figure out what exactly the book wants and how they can get rid of it and how they can prevent it from telling even more stories that put their lives in danger. But overall, guys, I really enjoyed this film a lot. As a fan of the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, I think this film was very faithful to those stories, at least the stories that were covered from those books. Not all the stories are covered. It was more of like an anthology. There'd be short little stories you would read, and that would equal one book. You'd move on to the second book, and there would be another series of stories you would read. Same with the third one. So there really wasn't like a Harry Potter or anything like that. It was more so an anthology of stories collected into books, and there happened to be about three of them. And so this film kind of picks and chooses some of those short stories that were used in those books. And I feel they used just the right amount of stories and the right kind of stories they can to make scary scenarios for these teenagers to live through, while also making sure there's a central story here and that the scenarios that they run into are kind of the short stories that were covered in the books and things like that. So I really, really enjoyed this movie a lot. So for my positives and negatives of this movie, like I said, this is a very faithful adaptation. Whether it is the Scarecrow story or the Big Toe story or the Pale Lady story or I think there was a haunted house story at one point in one of them. It's very faithful to the stories that were covered in the books, and they're finding a central story to use it in and all that good stuff. I'll also say too, for a PG-13 movie and for being kind of a young adult, late preteen horror series of books, there's a lot of scary moments in this movie. There's a lot of moments where I was kind of in the edge of my seat, really terrified to find out what was going to happen next. It built the suspense in all the right ways. When you see something scary happening, it is very scary to look at and things like that. So the film did a good job having many scary moments throughout this movie. I also like the idea of kind of the book writing itself. I like the idea of kind of a random time of the day. You'll see red ink appear in the one of the pages of the books, and then a story will start unfolding. You have to figure out where exactly the story's going to go, what person it involves, what these teenagers have to do to kind of survive the scenario. So I like this idea of kind of the book writing itself. It can happen at any time of the day. And if your name shows up, you kind of have to be careful with what you do, what you eat, how you react to something, how you choose to go about something. So I like that idea of this movie. It didn't just do what Goosebumps did and kind of have random monsters popping out of books and things like that. It was more so you see a story unfolding and it kind of connects to your life somehow, and you have to figure out how to survive that scenario. Guillermo Del Toro from The Shape of Water and Pan's Labyrinth, he's directed a lot of films. He was involved in a writing and producing standpoint for this movie. His special effects that he created for this movie were magnificent, whether it was practically done or done with CGI. Guillermo Del Toro really brought those illustrations you saw from the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books to film in all the right ways, whether it is getting the scarecrow to move or a corpse moving around a hallway in a creepy way. I thought Guillermo del Toro handled the special effects in this film in a very, very special way. I also just felt very invested in these lead characters in this movie. I really cared about them surviving the scenarios, finding ways to get rid of this book, get out of this really horrible scenario that keeps coming up of a name shows up in the book and they have to figure out how to survive the scenario and things like that. So I just felt invested in the characters. I really cared about their journey and I wanted them to survive this entire movie. I also like the film's atmosphere and 1960s setting. I think it takes place in 1968, so roughly around the time Night of the Living Dead came out. So they go to a drive-in theater and it's showing, and you kind of see people's reactions to certain scenes for the first time watching it. And because it's around Halloween time in 1968, it's Halloween. You see people in costumes and they're pulling pranks on each other, and people want to go to haunted houses, and it was just a very fun atmosphere that they had for this movie. I also like how the characters and creatures are kind of connected too, so it's not just person A and creature A, you're going to be in a story. Person B, creature B, you're going to be involved in a story in this book somehow. They kind of connected to the characters that they chose. So if a person's afraid of spiders, guess what? The person is going to be in a scenario where they have to survive spiders. If a person's afraid of something creeping in a hallway, guess what? That person's having a scenario where they got to survive that creature slash thing going through the hallway with them and things like that. So I like how the film connects those. I like how the film puts the smarter creatures with the smarter people, puts the not so smart people with the not so smart creatures, and connects them in all the right ways to make the story play out in all the right ways in a very interesting way. For my negatives of this movie, though, I thought when the film tried to take a stab at humor, the horror scenes kind of or the humorous scenes fell very flat for me. So when the film tries to do more of a comedic route for some of the scenes, whether it's a joke or the character giving a one-liner or something like that, I thought the humor scenes fell very flat in this movie. So I thought that aspect of the film was very disappointing. I also thought some of the character choices were very dumb in this movie. There's a scene where this guy has to basically go down all these hallways and figure out how to survive this creature that seems to be down every hallway that they go down. I was thinking the whole time, why doesn't he just try to punch or kick the monster? Why can't he just do that and get out of the way instead of going down every hallway only to find out that there's a monster waiting at the end of it? Why doesn't he just punch or kick or defend himself somehow from the monster? Or there's just a lot of scenarios like that. Why don't they try a weapon? Why don't they try another window or another door or something like that? There's a lot of dumb character choices in this film that you feel like if you were in their scenario, you'd probably be a little bit smarter than they were on some of these decisions that they make. I also thought some of the characters kind of felt like plot devices for this film. There was one lady in particular where she kind of gives this backstory on a lady they're trying to learn from the book, and she's really just there to kind of guide them to where they're going to go next in the movie. I feel like there's a lot of scenes where certain characters show up because the screenwriters are probably afraid that the teenagers can figure something out themselves, so they throw an adult in there to kind of guide them to somewhere so that the next scene can happen and things like that. So there's also these father figures of some of the teenagers that are just kind of there for support or to yell at them or to go make them do the trash when they get home or something like that. So I thought there were certain characters in this film that just really served as plot devices, got a character from point A to point B, and nothing more. So I'm going to give Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark an 8.5 out of 10. I highly recommend seeing this film. If you love the horror genre, if you love those Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books from when you were younger, or if you're new to those books by chance, I think this is a great film. I think if you're a Guillermo Del Toro fan and you kind of like the creature effects and the stories he gets involved with in this movies, I think you're also going to be very happy with this movie. I personally was very happy with it. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, once again, gets an 8.5 out of 10. I highly recommend seeing this movie.